China opposes any opposition to legislation and any violation of security and other laws.
We hope the United States increases its support for peace and security in Latin America and the Caribbean. That statement was intentional. The spokesperson for the Chinese government, Mao Ning, is sending a direct message to Donald Trump. And for the first time in years, China broke a diplomatic protocol by publicly defending Nicolas Maduro's Venezuela. Meanwhile, 6 American warships were approaching the Venezuelan coast. But why is China risking a diplomatic crisis with the United States because of Maduro? The answer lies in what China really wants from Venezuela. And Trump? Well, he might be about to ruin their plans. But before explaining what's at stake here, we need to understand what China really meant by that statement. As you can see, Mao Ning said that China opposes any action that violates a country's sovereignty. She spoke about carrying out actions that lead to peace in Latin America and the Caribbean. But, translating her diplomatic language, China was actually saying something like, "Don't mess with our investment." And, on the same day as that statement, something very revealing happened. Maduro rushed to meet with a Chinese ambassador in Venezuela. The photos show the two of them talking in a serious tone.
Seriously, President, my pleasure is
To talk with
you. My great pleasure needs me for unity. I like to comment thank you in
direction. As
Are we waiting? Maduro, after the meeting, even made a post praising China as the country that leads the world in human development. But we can bet that the conversation wasn't about human development. It was about how to protect Chinese investments that are at risk in Venezuela. Look, China rarely speaks out so directly about American military operations. When the Chinese break their silence like this, it's because there's a lot at stake. And in the case of Venezuela, we're talking about an amount that will make you rethink everything about this crisis. Here's what few people know about the relationship between China and Venezuela. In the last 10 years, China has lent more than $60 billion to Venezuela. $60 billion. To give you an idea of how big that number is, that's more than the entire gross domestic product of Uruguay, Paraguay, and Bolivia combined. Venezuela still owes about 20 billion of those loans. Now stop and think. If Maduro falls, who's going to pay that bill? And behind this loan, there's a system that, until now, worked in a brilliant way. At least on paper. China lent money to Venezuela, but instead of getting paid back in dollars, it was paid back in oil. Barrels and barrels of Venezuelan oil went straight to Chinese refineries as a form of payment. That's what experts call an oil for loans agreement. China secured energy for its economy and growth, while Venezuela secured money for its projects. But then reality hit. The Venezuelan economy went into total collapse. Oil production, which once reached 3 million barrels per day, plummeted to less than 1 million. The oil infrastructure
deteriorated. Venezuela is experiencing a major crisis after the election results, leaving the world on alert. Besides the political problems, one of the worrying points is also the crisis in the
oil sector. The price of Brent crude oil has been dropping sharply due to economic issues of demand.
The specialized technicians fled the country, and China found itself in a situation that no bank would want to be in. It had lent a fortune to a country that could barely pay its bills. And that's exactly why China can't just abandon Maduro. Every Chinese dollar invested in Venezuela is tied to the survival of the current government. It's like lending money to someone who's terribly in debt, hoping they'll pay you back someday. And anyone who thinks China supports Maduro because of communist or socialist ideology is mistaken. They support him because they need to protect their investment. It's pure financial math. If a new government takes over in Venezuela, it's very likely they'll do what any sensible government would do: question those huge debts incurred by the previous government. They might even declare that they won't honor the agreements made by Maduro. For China, that would be a financial disaster of historic proportions. To understand how we got to this point, we need to go back a bit in time and see how this whole situation started. For most of the 20th century, Venezuela was a reliable ally of the United States. The relationship was based on a simple exchange. Venezuela supplied cheap oil, and the United States provided military protection and access to the American market. It worked for decades. Everything changed drastically when Hugo Chavez came to power in 1999. Chavez not only hated Americans, he made it the hallmark of his government. He brought Venezuela closer to Cuba, Iran, and North Korea. All the traditional enemies of the United States became his best friends. It was a total rupture that redefined the entire geopolitics of the region. When Chavez died in 2013 and Maduro took over, the United States saw an opportunity to reverse that situation. They started with gradual economic sanctions, then escalated to devastating sanctions against the state oil company, which is the main source of revenue for the Venezuelan government. The goal was to economically strangle the regime until it imploded. In 2019, the United States recognized Juan Guaidó, president of the National Assembly, as the legitimate president of Venezuela. About 50 countries followed the American example. And more recently, the American Department of Justice formally accused Maduro of drug trafficking. They put a $50 million reward on his capture. And it was exactly at those moments that China saw a chance to increase its influence. While the United States was pushing Venezuela away with sanctions and isolation, China arrived with an outstretched hand and open coffers. And this partnership was quickly turned into a relationship that they themselves defined as strategic, comprehensive, and for all times. It may seem like just a diplomatic term, but this is a classification that China reserves only for its most strategic allies. Russia, Pakistan, and Iran also have this status. And now, Venezuela is part of this select group. And the result of this partnership was that China gained a solid foothold in Latin America. But all this financial math from China has a problem. Donald Trump has just returned to power, and the Monroe Doctrine, which considers Latin America as the natural sphere of influence of the United States, is still alive and strong in the mindset of Americans. Seeing China financing a government they consider hostile and right off the coast of Florida is simply unacceptable. And this is where things get really tense. That's because the 6 American ships approaching Venezuela aren't ordinary vessels. They're war machines. The main one is the United States ship Iwo Jima. It's a steel monster that functions like a mini aircraft carrier. This ship has a continuous flight deck that stretches over 200 meters. It can carry fighter jets and dozens of attack helicopters. It's capable of launching devastating airstrikes against targets on land. It's definitely not equipment for catching drug traffickers in speedboats. Along with the Iwo Jima are 2 amphibious transport ships, the United States ship San Antonio and the United States ship Fort Lauderdale. These ships are specifically designed for one thing: landing troops on enemy territory. They have landing craft that can take soldiers directly to the beaches. They have helicopters for rapid troop transport, and they have all the logistics needed to sustain an invasion. On board, these ships are 4,500 American soldiers, but they are not ordinary soldiers. There are 2,200 Marines from the 22nd Marine Expeditionary Unit. This unit is a rapid response force, trained for amphibious assaults, special operations, and seizing territory. It's enough force to take the capital of Venezuela in a matter of hours. If...
Thank you for watching.
Good. To fight drug trafficking, you'd need some Coast Guard boats, and maybe some specialized agents. Now that's an impressive show of force, which goes way beyond what you usually see in anti-drug operations. The Americans also sent 3 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, the United States ship Gravely, the United States ship Jason Dunham, and the United States ship Samson. These are some of the most advanced warships in the world. Each one is equipped with an Aegis combat system capable of tracking hundreds of targets simultaneously. They carry Tomahawk cruise missiles, which can fly at low altitude for hundreds of kilometers and hit a specific building with surgical precision. There's also an American nuclear submarine operating in waters near Venezuela. Nuclear submarines are not used to intercept drugs. They are tools of war against other states. They can launch cruise missiles against land targets. They can carry out covert intelligence operations. They can even deploy special forces on enemy territory without being detected. And completing this force is the P-8 Poseidon aircraft. This plane circled off the Venezuelan coast for 2 nights in a row. The P-8 is not an ordinary plane. It's an electronic warfare platform capable of mapping enemy defense systems, intercepting military communications, and even launching torpedoes and anti-ship missiles. For those who understand military strategy, this combination of forces doesn't make much sense for an anti-drug operation. It seems China has already noticed that. What about Venezuela? Well, it seems that they won't just stand by and watch either. In recent days, videos have started circulating on social media from unofficial sources showing Venezuelan military vessels with supposedly Chinese weaponry sailing near the coast. But we couldn't independently verify this information. Now, all this show of force by the United States is making China nervous for a very specific reason. In June of this year, Israel and the United States launched devastating attacks against Iranian nuclear facilities. But before the attacks, exactly the same sequence happened as is happening now with Venezuela. First, the American embassy in Iran issued a severe security alert, asking American citizens to leave the country immediately. Then, there was a large buildup of American military forces in the Persian Gulf region. And finally, there were the bombings that destroyed decades of Iran's nuclear program. And Trump? He has already shown he won't hesitate to use military force when he deems it necessary. With Iran, all the Chinese and Russian diplomatic warnings didn't help at all. When Trump decided to attack, he attacked. And maybe that's why China is getting involved in this matter. China's response to this naval crisis reveals a lot about how China intends to deal with Trump over the next 4 years. That's because China probably won't confront the United States militarily in the Caribbean. That would be a disaster. The American Navy is incomparably superior in the region, but China can dramatically increase the political cost of any American military action. By publicly coming out in defense of Venezuela, China turns this crisis in South America into a test. A test where it sends a message to dozens of other countries. If you are strategic partners of China, we will defend you diplomatically. China is also betting on an American political reality that Trump is weighing the costs of a possible intervention. An invasion of Venezuela would be deeply unpopular within the United States itself, especially if it resulted in a prolonged occupation. The big question that remains is what else China could do, besides diplomatic statements, since military options are out of the question. What is clear is that we are witnessing a completely new kind of confrontation between superpowers. Venezuela ended up at the center of this dispute, and what happens in the next few weeks could change everything. Now, I want to know your opinion. Do you think Trump will actually take military action in Venezuela? Leave in the comments what you think is going to happen. If this content was useful for you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share the video. That way you stay up to date on all the analyses about the main geopolitical events in the world.